There are moments in time that break open like lightning across a dark sky, revealing truths we were never meant to see. This is one of those moments. Watch closely. A young woman stands outside a courthouse, her face streaked with tears that catch the afternoon light. Her shoulders shake with sobs that come from somewhere deeper than grief, somewhere closer to the soul. Inside those walls, a police officer is being led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, his badge stripped away like skin from bone. An older woman, hands weathered by decades of work, whispers words that will echo through this entire story. Truth always finds its way home. And a voice, steady and certain, speaks over it all. They took everything from her. Her degree, her dreams, her dignity. All because she shined too bright for someone who carried too much hate. But when truth finally rose, it burned everything false to ashes. Now let us go back. Let us go back to where the light was still whole, before it was shattered into 1,000 pieces of pain. Ava Johnson was 22 years old the day her world changed forever. 22 and brilliant in the way that makes people stop and take notice, not because she demanded attention, but because excellence has its own gravity. She was a senior at Westbridge University, majoring in biochemistry with a focus that her professors described as laser-sharp, the kind of focus that sees solutions where others see only problems. Her mind worked in patterns and possibilities, in molecular structures and chemical reactions, in the beautiful mathematics of life itself. On a Tuesday morning in late spring, when the campus trees were heavy with new leaves and the air smelled like cut grass and possibility, Ava received news that would have made anyone's heart soar. The National Science Foundation had selected her research proposal on sustainable water purification systems for developing nations as the winner of the prestigious Chambers Award. It was the kind of honor that opened doors, that changed trajectories, that said to the world, this person matters, this work matters, this mind will shape our future. The award came with $25,000, a guaranteed interview with 3 Fortune 500 companies, and recognition that would follow her name for the rest of her career. When Ava got the call, she was sitting in the university library, surrounded by textbooks and half-empty coffee cups, preparing for finals like it was just another ordinary day. But the moment she heard those words, "Congratulations, Miss Johnson, you've been selected," her ordinary day became extraordinary. She called her mother immediately, her voice breaking with joy and disbelief, and on the other end of the line, Ruth Johnson wept the kind of tears that mothers weep when they see their children reaching heights they themselves could only dream of. Ruth Johnson was a woman carved from sacrifice and love. For 22 years, she had worked as a housemaid, cleaning the homes of families who never looked at her long enough to know her name. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors, washing windows, folding other people's laundry with a care she wished she could give to her own life. She had raised Ava alone after Ava's father left when Ava was 3, left with nothing but a note and empty promises. Ruth had been a maid, a mother, a teacher, a protector, a dreamer who poured all her dreams into her daughter because she knew that Ava could be everything Ruth never had the chance to become. For the past 7 years, Ruth had worked at the home of Police Chief Marcus Reed, a man known throughout the city as one of the last honest cops in a department riddled with corruption and compromise. Chief Reed treated Ruth with respect, paid her fairly, and sometimes, when she worked late, he would sit at the kitchen table and talk to her about his own struggles with the force, about how hard it was to stay clean in a dirty system. Ruth liked him. More than that, she trusted him, which was something she didn't give easily to anyone wearing a badge. The day after Ava won the award, Ruth went to work at the chief's house with her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She hummed as she dusted, smiled as she mopped, and when Chief Reed asked her why she seemed so happy, she told him about Ava, about the award, about the future that was finally opening up for her baby girl. The chief smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and he told Ruth that Ava must be something special to have a mother who believed in her so completely. Ruth nodded, wiping away a tear with the back of her hand, and she said that Ava was her miracle, her proof that God was still watching. That weekend, the university held a ceremony to honor Ava and the other award recipients. Ava wore a simple blue dress that Ruth had saved for months to buy, and when she walked across that stage to accept her plaque and her scholarship check, the applause was thunderous. Her professors stood and clapped. Her classmates cheered. Cameras flashed like stars. And in the back row, Ruth Johnson stood with her hands clasped together, tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter shine with a light so bright it seemed impossible that anyone could ever want to dim it. But someone did want to dim it. Someone watched that ceremony with eyes full of poison and a heart black with envy. Officer Bradley Kane was a 15-year veteran of the city police force, a man with a badge and a gun and a bitterness that had rotted him from the inside out. He had joined the force young, full of ideas about justice and serving the community, but somewhere along the way, those ideas had curdled into resentment. He resented the people he was supposed to protect. He resented his colleagues who seemed to care about the job. He resented his own reflection in the mirror because it showed him a man who had never become anything more than mediocre. Bradley had a daughter named Emma, a girl who was also 22, who had also applied for the Chambers Award. Emma was a decent student, not brilliant, not exceptional, just decent. She had worked hard on her proposal, spent months researching and writing, had hoped that maybe, just maybe, this would be her moment to prove she was more than just her father's daughter. But Emma's proposal had been rejected in the preliminary rounds. She hadn't even made it to the final selection. And when Bradley found out that Ava Johnson, a black girl from the poor side of town, a girl whose mother cleaned houses for a living, had won the award his daughter deserved, something inside him snapped. It wasn't just disappointment. It was rage. It was the kind of rage that comes from years of feeling overlooked and undervalued, the kind of rage that needed a target, needed someone to blame, needed to destroy something beautiful because beauty felt like an insult. Bradley looked at Ava's photo in the university newsletter, looked at her smile, her confident eyes, her dark skin glowing with achievement, and he decided that she didn't deserve what she had. He decided that she must have cheated, must have stolen something, must have done something wrong, because in Bradley's poisoned mind, people like Ava weren't supposed to win. They were supposed to know their place. Bradley Kane was not a good man, but he was a clever one. He knew how systems worked, knew how to manipulate evidence, knew how to make lies look like truth. He spent 3 days planning his revenge, 3 days constructing a trap so perfect that Ava would never see it coming. He accessed the university's database using credentials he had obtained through a previous investigation, downloaded copies of the Chambers Award exam materials, and then created a false digital trail that made it look like someone from Ava's student account had accessed those files 2 weeks before the submission deadline. He fabricated timestamps, created fake email exchanges, and planted encrypted files on a dummy drive that he would later claim was seized from Ava's apartment. On a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the award ceremony, Bradley Kane and 3 other officers arrived at Westbridge University with a warrant for Ava Johnson's arrest. They found her in the biochemistry lab, working on an experiment with 2 classmates, her hair pulled back, safety goggles on, completely absorbed in her work. When Bradley walked in, his boots loud on the tile floor, Ava looked up with curiosity, not fear. She didn't know yet that her life was about to end. Bradley announced that Ava Johnson was under arrest for theft of intellectual property and academic fraud. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ava's classmates stepped back, confusion on their faces. Ava herself just stared at the officer, certain that this must be a mistake, must be some kind of terrible mix-up. She asked what he was talking about, her voice steady but small. Bradley smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes, and he told her that they had evidence she had stolen the exam materials for the Chambers Award, that she had cheated her way to victory, that everything she had earned was a lie. Ava's legs went weak. She grabbed the edge of the lab table to steady herself, her mind racing through possibilities, through defenses, through the absolute certainty that this couldn't be happening because she had never cheated on anything in her life. She told the officer he was wrong, that there must be a mistake, that she had done everything honestly. But Bradley wasn't listening. He was already pulling out handcuffs, already moving toward her with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. They arrested her right there in the lab, in front of her classmates, in front of her professor who had just walked in and stood frozen in the doorway. They put handcuffs on her wrists, cold metal biting into her skin, and walked her out through the science building, down the main corridor where students stopped and stared, out into the quad where the spring sun felt like a spotlight exposing her shame. Someone filmed it on their phone. Within an hour, the video was online. Within 3 hours, it had been shared 10,000 times. Ava Johnson, the girl who had shined so bright, was now the girl being arrested for fraud, and the internet devoured the story with gleeful cruelty. Ruth Johnson found out about her daughter's arrest when Chief Reed came home early and asked her, gently, carefully, if she knew what had happened at the university. Ruth's hands had been in soapy dishwater, but she pulled them out slowly, drying them on her apron, and asked what he meant. The chief showed her the video on his phone, and Ruth's knees gave out. She sat down hard on the kitchen floor, her apron soaking with suds, and she wept with a sound that came from the deepest part of her soul, a sound that the chief would remember for the rest of his life. The case moved quickly, too quickly. The university suspended Ava immediately, pending investigation. The Chambers Foundation revoked her award and demanded the return of the scholarship money. The Fortune 500 companies that had been preparing to interview her sent polite emails withdrawing their invitations. Her friends, the people she had studied with and laughed with and dreamed with, suddenly became strangers. They stopped answering her calls. They unfriended her on social media. They looked away when they saw her on campus during the brief period before she was officially expelled. Ava tried to fight. She hired a lawyer with the little money Ruth had saved, a public defender who was overworked and underpaid and who told Ava, honestly, that the evidence against her looked bad. The digital trail was thorough. The timestamps were damning. The encrypted files had been found in a storage unit that someone had rented using a fake ID, but the rental agreement had Ava's signature on it, or at least something that looked enough like her signature that a jury might believe it. Ava swore she had never rented any storage unit, had never accessed any exam materials, had never even known those files existed. But her protestations sounded hollow even to her own ears, because how do you prove a negative? How do you prove you didn't do something when all the evidence says you did? The preliminary hearing was held on a rainy Tuesday in June. Ava sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit that didn't fit quite right, her mother behind her in the gallery, and listened as the prosecutor laid out the case against her. The prosecutor was young and ambitious, eager to make an example of academic fraud, eager to show that the system treated everyone equally, even promising young students who thought they were above the rules. The prosecutor talked about privilege and accountability, about how Ava had taken an opportunity away from someone more deserving, about how academic integrity was the foundation of everything the university stood for. The irony of those words, coming from a system that was itself built on a lie, was not lost on Ava. But she sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, and listened to her life being dismantled piece by piece. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and tired eyes, listened to the evidence and then set a trial date for August. She also ruled that Ava's scholarship money had to be returned within 30 days, money that Ava had already used for tuition and books in the small apartment she shared with 2 other students who had now moved out, leaving her with a lease she couldn't afford. Ava walked out of that courtroom feeling like a ghost, like something that had once been alive but was now just going through the motions of existence. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Ava's life. She moved back into Ruth's small apartment, a 2-bedroom place in a building where the heat barely worked in winter and the pipes sang sad songs at night. She spent her days lying on her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how her life had come apart so completely. She replayed every moment leading up to the award, searched her memory for anything that might explain the evidence against her, but found nothing. She had done everything right. She had worked hard, studied hard, dreamed hard. And still, she was being punished for it. Ruth went to work every day at Chief Reed's house, but the joy had gone out of her. She moved through her tasks mechanically, dusting and mopping and folding laundry with hands that shook and eyes that were always red from crying. She prayed constantly, whispered prayers under her breath as she worked, begging God to show them the way out of this nightmare, to prove that her daughter was innocent, to restore what had been stolen. The chief noticed her pain but didn't know what to say. He had looked into Ava's case himself, quietly, and the evidence seemed solid. He wanted to believe in her innocence, wanted to believe that Ruth's faith in her daughter wasn't misplaced, but he was a cop, and cops were trained to believe in evidence, not in faith. Summer crawled by like a wounded animal. Ava's trial date approached. Her lawyer told her to consider a plea deal, told her that the prosecution was offering 18 months probation and community service if she would just admit guilt, but Ava refused. She would not confess to something she didn't do. She would not let them put those words in her mouth. She would rather go to trial and lose than surrender the one thing she had left, which was the truth. But the truth felt very far away, buried under mountains of fake evidence and public opinion and a system that had already decided she was guilty. Ava stopped sleeping more than a few hours a night. She lost weight. Her hair started falling out in clumps. Ruth would find her daughter standing at the bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning, just staring at her own reflection like she didn't recognize the person looking back. One night, Ruth heard Ava crying through the thin bedroom wall, crying and saying over and over, "I didn't do anything wrong, I didn't do anything wrong," and Ruth went to her daughter and held her and cried with her, and neither of them had any words left to say because words had failed them. Then, on a Thursday night in late July, something happened that would change everything. Ruth was working late at Chief Reed's house. The chief had hosted a small dinner party for some of his colleagues from the force, and Ruth had stayed to clean up afterwards. She was in the kitchen, washing wine glasses and stacking plates, when she heard voices from the chief's study. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, Ruth could see two men sitting with drinks, talking in the low, casual way that men talk when they think no one is listening. One of the men was Officer Bradley Kane. Ruth recognized his voice before she saw his face. He was laughing about something, a harsh laugh that made her skin crawl. She stopped washing the glasses, her hands going still in the soapy water, and she listened. Bradley was telling a story to his companion, another officer Ruth didn't recognize. He was telling the story of how he had framed Ava Johnson, and he was telling it like it was funny, like it was something to be proud of. Bradley said that the Johnson girl had it coming, said she had taken something that belonged to his Emma, said that people like her needed to learn their place. He described how he had planted the evidence, how easy it had been to manipulate the digital trail, how stupid Ava had been to never see it coming. He talked about how satisfying it had been to see her arrested, to see her dreams destroyed, to watch her mother cry. He said that Ruth Johnson cleaned his colleague's house, and wasn't it perfect that the maid's daughter had been brought down to where she belonged, mopping floors instead of winning awards. The other officer laughed along, made a comment about how sometimes the system needed a little help to deliver justice. Bradley agreed, said that justice was what you made it, said that he had no regrets. He said that even if Ava was found innocent, her reputation was destroyed, her future was ruined, and that was punishment enough. He raised his glass in a mock toast, to keeping people in their place, and both men laughed. Ruth stood in that kitchen, her hands submerged in cooling dishwater, and felt something inside her crystallize into steel. For weeks she had prayed for a sign, for proof, for anything that would save her daughter. And now she had it. She had heard the confession with her own ears, heard this monster admit what he had done. But she also knew that her word alone wouldn't be enough. She was just a maid. Bradley Kane was a decorated police officer. Who would believe her? But Chief Reed would believe her. Ruth trusted that. She trusted him because he had always treated her with dignity, had always listened when she spoke, had always been fair. She finished washing the glasses with shaking hands, dried them carefully, put them away. She waited until the dinner party was over, until all the guests had left, until it was just her and the chief in that big house. And then she told him everything. Chief Marcus Reed listened to Ruth Johnson's story with the same intensity he brought to every case he worked. He didn't interrupt. He didn't express doubt. He just listened, his face growing harder with every word. When Ruth finished, when she finally ran out of words and stood there trembling, waiting for his response, the chief was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked her if she was absolutely certain about what she had heard. Ruth looked him in the eyes and said she would swear it on her daughter's life, on her own life, on everything she held sacred. The chief nodded slowly, and then he said something that Ruth would remember forever. He said that there was nothing in this world he hated more than a corrupt cop, and if Bradley Kane had done what Ruth said he did, then he would make sure Bradley paid for it. But the chief also told Ruth that they had to be careful, had to be strategic, because Bradley was smart and would have covered his tracks well. They couldn't just accuse him openly. They needed proof, real proof, the kind that would hold up in court and couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The chief told Ruth to say nothing to anyone, not even to Ava, because if word got out that they were investigating, Bradley would disappear the evidence and they would never be able to touch him. So Ruth went home that night carrying a secret that felt like it was burning a hole in her chest. She looked at her daughter, sleeping fitfully on the couch with case files scattered around her, and she wanted to wake her up and tell her that hope was coming, that justice was coming, that the nightmare was almost over. But she said nothing. She just pulled a blanket over Ava's shoulders, kissed her forehead, and whispered a prayer of thanks that finally, someone was listening. Chief Reed began his investigation the next morning. He worked carefully, quietly, telling no one what he was doing. He started by pulling Bradley Kane's case files from the past year, looking for patterns, looking for anything that seemed off. He found irregularities immediately. Bradley had accessed the university database multiple times over the past 6 months, far more than any active investigation would require. He had also accessed evidence logs in ways that triggered red flags, had checked out equipment without proper authorization, had filed reports that were vague and incomplete. The chief dug deeper. He pulled the original digital evidence from Ava's case and had it analyzed by the department's forensic tech team, but he told them to keep the analysis quiet, said it was for a training exercise. The tech team came back with interesting findings. The timestamps on the supposed stolen files showed signs of manipulation. The metadata had been altered. The encryption signatures didn't match Ava's computer or any device registered to her. Someone with technical knowledge had created this evidence, and they had been good, but not quite good enough to fool experts who knew what to look for. The chief found more. He discovered that the storage unit allegedly rented by Ava had been paid for with a prepaid credit card purchased at a convenience store 3 blocks from Bradley Kane's house. The store had security footage. The chief obtained it and watched Bradley himself buying that card, watched him counting out cash and walking out with his head down, thinking he was being clever. The signature on the storage unit rental agreement was a forgery, decent but not perfect, and a handwriting expert would be able to prove it wasn't Ava's. Piece by piece, the chief built his case. He worked late into the night, skipping meals, ignoring his wife's concerns, driven by a rage he hadn't felt in years. Bradley Kane had betrayed everything the badge was supposed to stand for. He had used his power not to protect, but to destroy. He had targeted an innocent young woman out of nothing but spite and racism and jealousy. And he had done it so casually, so arrogantly, because he thought he was untouchable. The chief spent 3 weeks gathering evidence before he made his move. He needed it to be airtight, needed to be absolutely certain, because he would only get one chance at this. If he accused Bradley without enough proof, the department would close ranks, the union would protect him, and Ava would be left with nothing but more false hope. So the chief waited, and verified, and checked every detail twice and then 3 times. Finally, he had what he needed. He had the forensic analysis proving the digital evidence was fabricated. He had the security footage placing Bradley at the convenience store where the prepaid card was purchased. He had witness statements from other officers who reported that Bradley had been obsessed with his daughter's rejection from the Chambers Award competition. He had Bradley's own service record showing a pattern of disciplinary actions for aggressive behavior and racial bias. He had everything. The chief brought his findings to the district attorney, a woman named Carmen Reyes who had a reputation for being tough but fair. He laid out the evidence on her desk and watched her face change as she read through the file. When she finished, she looked up at the chief with eyes that were both angry and sad, and she asked him how long this had been going on. The chief told her about Ruth's testimony, about what Bradley had said in his own home, bragging about the crime like it was a trophy. Carmen Reyes sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that this was going to get ugly, that the department would fight back, that Bradley would have his defenders. But she also said that they were going forward, consequences be damned, because if they didn't stand up for the truth now, then nothing they did would ever mean anything. Ava Johnson's trial was scheduled for the first Monday in August. By Sunday night, she was so terrified she could barely breathe. Ruth had been acting strange for weeks, distracted and secretive, but when Ava asked her mother what was wrong, Ruth would just smile and say that everything was in God's hands now. Ava didn't find that comforting. She had stopped believing that God was paying attention to her life. She had started to believe that maybe she deserved this somehow, that maybe she was being punished for some sin she couldn't remember committing, for having the audacity to dream too big. The courthouse was old and imposing, all marble and dark wood and high ceilings that made every sound echo like judgment. Ava arrived early with Ruth and her lawyer. They sat on a bench outside the courtroom, watching other people pass by, lawyers in expensive suits, families supporting their loved ones, court officers who had seen it all and were impressed by nothing. Ava's hands were shaking so badly that Ruth took them in her own and held them tight. Ruth whispered that everything was going to be all right, that Ava needed to trust her, needed to believe. Ava wanted to believe. But belief was hard when the whole world had turned against you. The courtroom filled up. Ava was surprised by how many people were there. She recognized some professors from the university, some students, reporters from local news outlets who sensed this might be a story. She saw Bradley Kane sitting with the prosecution team, looking confident and relaxed, like a man who had already won. She saw Bradley's daughter Emma sitting in the gallery, her head down, not looking at anyone. And then, just before the judge was set to enter, Ava saw Chief Reed walk into the courtroom, followed by District Attorney Carmen Reyes, and both of them looked like they were walking into battle. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The judge, the same tired woman from the preliminary hearing, called the court to order and asked if both sides were ready to proceed. The prosecutor stood and said he was ready. Ava's lawyer stood, looking nervous, and said he was ready. But before the opening statements could begin, Chief Reed stood up from the gallery and asked permission to address the court. The judge looked surprised but nodded. The chief walked to the front of the courtroom, his uniform crisp, his badge catching the light, and he said that he had new evidence relevant to this case, evidence that had come to light during an internal affairs investigation, evidence that would exonerate Ava Johnson and identify the real criminal. The courtroom went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Every eye turned to the chief as he began to speak. Chief Reed told them everything. He presented the forensic analysis showing the digital evidence had been fabricated. He showed the security footage of Bradley Kane purchasing the prepaid card used to rent the storage unit. He presented testimony from other officers about Bradley's anger over his daughter's rejection from the Chambers Award. He detailed how Bradley had accessed the university database illegally, how he had planted false evidence, how he had destroyed an innocent woman's life out of racism and jealousy and pure malicious spite. The chief's voice was steady and hard as he laid out the case, and with each piece of evidence, Ava felt something inside her crack open, something that had been frozen in fear beginning to thaw. The prosecutor, a young man who had been so confident just minutes before, looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He tried to object, tried to say this was irregular, tried to regain control of his case, but the judge silenced him with a single look. The judge asked the chief if he was prepared to provide all this evidence to the defense and to the court. The chief said he had copies prepared and handed over thick folders to everyone who needed them. Then the chief turned to look at Bradley Kane, and his voice got quiet, got cold, got dangerous. He said that Bradley had disgraced the badge, had betrayed the public trust, had used his authority to commit a crime that was as morally bankrupt as any he had ever seen. The chief said that Bradley would be arrested immediately, that he would be charged with fabricating evidence, abuse of power, and conspiracy to commit fraud, and that he hoped Bradley would spend a very long time thinking about what he had done while he sat in a cell. Two officers who had come with the chief moved toward Bradley. For a moment, Bradley didn't move. He sat there staring at the chief with pure hatred in his eyes, his face going red, his hands clenched into fists. He looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but what could he say? The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was standing in front of him, tall and implacable and impossible to deny. The officers put handcuffs on Bradley Kane right there in the courtroom, in front of everyone, and as they led him away, he passed Ava's table. He looked at her once, just once, and Ava looked back, and what she saw in his eyes was not remorse. It was anger that he had been caught. But then something happened that no one expected. Emma Kane, Bradley's daughter, stood up from the gallery. She was crying, her face blotchy and red, her hands shaking. She said in a voice that cracked with emotion that she needed to say something, that she couldn't stay silent anymore. The judge, clearly surprised, asked her to approach. Emma walked to the front of the courtroom, and with everyone watching, she confessed. Emma said she had known. She had known from the beginning that her father had framed Ava Johnson. She had overheard him planning it, had seen the fake evidence on his computer, had watched him practice his lies. She said she had wanted to speak up, had wanted to tell someone, but she had been terrified of her father, terrified of what he might do if she betrayed him. She said she had lived with the guilt every single day, had watched Ava's life fall apart and known it was partly her fault for staying silent. Emma looked at Ava then, tears streaming down her face, and she said she was sorry, said she knew sorry wasn't enough, said she understood if Ava could never forgive her, but she needed to say it anyway. The courtroom was absolutely still. Emma's confession hung in the air like a prayer or a curse, something holy and broken at the same time. Ava looked at Emma, looked at this girl who was her age, who had also been damaged by Bradley Kane's poison, and she felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Emma had been afraid. Fear made people do terrible things, made them betray their own conscience, made them complicit in evil even when they wanted to be good. Ava knew about fear now. She had lived inside it for months. The judge, who had presided over thousands of cases and thought she had seen everything, wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. She asked Emma if she would be willing to provide a formal statement to the district attorney. Emma nodded, still crying, and said she would tell them everything. The judge looked at Ava then, really looked at her, and said that she was deeply sorry for what Ava had endured, sorry that the system had failed her so completely, sorry that justice had taken so long to arrive. The judge dismissed all charges against Ava Johnson. She said the words slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone in the courtroom heard them. Not guilty. Innocent. Exonerated. The case was over. Ava was free. The judge also took the unusual step of ordering the university to reinstate Ava immediately with full restoration of her scholarship and all rights and privileges. She ordered the Chambers Foundation to reinstate Ava's award. She said that Ava had been the victim of a monstrous injustice, and everyone who had participated in that injustice, even passively, should be ashamed. The courtroom erupted. People stood and applauded. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Ruth Johnson collapsed in her seat, sobbing so hard her whole body shook, sobbing with relief and joy and the release of months of unbearable tension. Ava sat very still, trying to process what had just happened, trying to believe that it was real. Her lawyer was talking to her, congratulating her, but his words sounded far away. All Ava could hear was her own heartbeat, strong and steady, still beating, still alive. Ruth pulled Ava into her arms and held her daughter the way she had held her when Ava was small, held her and rocked her and whispered, "Thank you God, thank you God, thank you." Ava clung to her mother and finally let herself cry, let out all the fear and pain and rage she had been holding inside for months. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and clean. Chief Reed came over to them, his face serious but his eyes kind. He told Ava that he was sorry, sorry for what she had endured, sorry that one of his officers had done this to her. He said that Bradley Kane would face the full weight of the law, that he would lose his badge and his pension and likely serve time in prison. He said that Emma Kane would face charges too, though likely lesser ones given her cooperation and her youth. He said that the department would be conducting a full review of all of Bradley's past cases to see if there were other victims, other lives he had destroyed. Ava thanked the chief, her voice hoarse from crying. She thanked him for believing Ruth, for investigating when he could have done nothing, for standing up when it would have been easier to look away. The chief shook his head and said he had only done what any decent person should do, what any decent cop was supposed to do. He said that the real hero was Ruth, who had risked everything to tell him what she had heard, who had trusted him when she had no reason to trust any police officer ever again. The story of Ava's exoneration spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was national news. The video of her arrest that had destroyed her reputation was now played alongside the video of Bradley Kane being led away in handcuffs, and the narrative changed completely. Ava was no longer the girl who had cheated. She was the girl who had been framed, the girl who had survived, the girl who had been vindicated by truth. Social media exploded with support. People who had condemned her without knowing the facts now apologized. The university issued a formal public apology. The Chambers Foundation called to personally express their regret and to confirm that her award was fully reinstated. But the most meaningful call came 3 days later. It came from Sarah Chen, the Vice President of Human Resources at Meridian Industries, one of the Fortune 500 companies that had originally withdrawn their interview invitation after Ava's arrest. Sarah told Ava that they had been following her story, that they had watched her handle an impossible situation with grace and dignity, and that they wanted to offer her more than just an interview. They wanted to offer her a position. It was a junior research position in their sustainable technology division, working on exactly the kind of water purification systems that Ava had proposed for the Chambers Award. The salary was more than Ava had ever dreamed of making fresh out of college. The benefits included full healthcare, education reimbursement for graduate school, and relocation assistance to their headquarters in San Francisco. Sarah told Ava that they believed in her, that her intelligence and resilience were exactly what they needed on their team, and that they would be honored if she would consider joining them. Ava said yes. Of course she said yes. But more than the job, more than the salary, more than any of it, what mattered to Ava was that someone had seen what she had survived and had decided she was worth believing in. That was the real gift. 2 weeks later, Ava and Ruth stood outside the Meridian Industries building in downtown San Francisco. It was Ava's first day of work. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel reaching up toward a cloudless blue sky. People in professional clothes streamed in and out of the revolving doors, everyone moving with purpose, everyone part of something bigger than themselves. Ava was about to become part of that. She was about to step into the future she had almost lost. Ruth adjusted Ava's collar, a maternal gesture that made them both smile. Ruth said that she was proud of her daughter, prouder than words could express, proud not just because Ava had won or because she had survived, but because through everything, Ava had never stopped being herself, had never let the lies change who she was inside. Ava hugged her mother tight and whispered, "Thank you for everything, thank you for believing in me when no one else did, thank you for being my strength when I had none left." They stood there together for a moment, a mother and daughter who had walked through fire and come out on the other side, scarred but unbroken, tested but not destroyed. Ruth kissed Ava's forehead one more time, the same way she had kissed it every night when Ava was small, and then she stepped back and told her daughter to go shine, to go be brilliant, to go show the world what they almost lost. Ava walked into that building with her head high. She walked past the security desk, past the modern art in the lobby, past the water feature that sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the huge windows. She took the elevator up to the 15th floor where her new team was waiting to meet her. And with each step, she felt herself becoming whole again, felt the broken pieces of her life starting to fit back together, not perfectly, never perfectly, because some scars don't heal completely, but good enough, strong enough, real enough. The truth had found its way home, just as Ruth had said it would. It had taken time. It had taken pain. It had taken a mother's faith and a good man's courage and a broken girl's confession. But it had come. And when it came, it had burned away everything false and left only what was real. Bradley Kane was sentenced to 7 years in prison for fabricating evidence, abuse of power, and violating civil rights. Emma Kane received 2 years probation and community service for being an accessory after the fact. The university established a scholarship in Ava's name for underrepresented students in STEM fields. Chief Reed was promoted to deputy commissioner and made it his mission to root out corruption wherever he found it. And Ava Johnson, the girl who had been framed for winning, who had been punished for being brilliant, who had been broken down and built back up, went to work every day in that glass tower and changed the world in small ways that added up to something big. She developed water purification systems that are now being used in 12 countries. She published research that won awards. She mentored young women who looked like her and told them that yes, the world would try to stop them, yes, there would be people who couldn't stand to see them shine, but that their light was not negotiable, their brilliance was not up for debate, and their dreams were worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. Ruth still cleaned houses for a while, not because she had to, but because the work was honest and she liked being useful. Eventually, Ava convinced her to retire, bought her a small house near the ocean where Ruth could finally rest, where she could sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sun set over water that went on forever. Ruth lived in that house and grew flowers in the garden, and sometimes she would sit with her tea and remember those dark months when everything seemed lost, and she would whisper a prayer of gratitude that they had survived, that truth had mattered, that justice had come. Because that's the thing about injustice. It wants you to believe that it's permanent, that the lies will always win, that the powerful will never be held accountable, that one person's voice doesn't matter. But injustice is wrong about that. Truth is patient but relentless. It waits for its moment. It gathers its evidence. And when it finally rises, it burns everything false to ashes. They tried to bury Ava Johnson because she bloomed where they could not. They tried to crush her because her light made their darkness visible. They tried to erase her because her existence was a challenge to their small, bitter worldview. But they failed. They failed because Ava had something they could never take away, something that lived deeper than reputation or awards or recognition. She had worth. She had truth. She had a mother who believed in her and a spirit that refused to break. And flowers that grow through concrete, flowers that push through impossible barriers, flowers that bloom despite everything trying to stop them, those flowers never forget the sunlight that brought them back. They remember. They carry that light inside them. They become the light themselves. Ava Johnson is that light now. She shines not with the bright flash of sudden success, but with the steady glow of someone who knows what darkness looks like and chose to believe in dawn anyway. She shines for everyone who has been falsely accused, for everyone whose dreams have been stolen, for everyone who has been told they don't belong in spaces they earned the right to occupy. She shines because that's what survivors do. They take their broken pieces and they make something beautiful. They take their pain and they transform it into purpose. And late at night, when Ava sits in her apartment overlooking the bay, working on research that will bring clean water to people who have never had it, she sometimes thinks about Bradley Kane sitting in his prison cell, about how his hate had consumed him, about how his jealousy had destroyed not just her life but his own. She doesn't forgive him. Some things are too big for forgiveness. But she has released him. She has let go of the anger that once threatened to poison her the way hate had poisoned him. She has chosen a different path. Because in the end, that's what justice really is. It's not just about punishment. It's not just about making the guilty suffer. It's about restoration. It's about taking what was broken and making it whole again. It's about ensuring that the victim gets to live the life they were always meant to live, the life that was stolen from them, the life they earned through talent and hard work and refusing to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. Ava Johnson got her life back. She got more than her life back. She got her future. And that future is bright, so bright it hurts to look at directly, so bright it illuminates everything around it, so bright that other young women see her and think maybe, just maybe, I can do that too, maybe I can survive too, maybe I can shine too. That's the real ending to this story. Not the arrest or the trial or the job offer. The real ending is that Ava kept going. She kept believing. She kept pushing through the concrete. She kept reaching for the sunlight. And when she finally broke through, when she finally felt warmth on her face again, she didn't just stand there basking in it. She turned around and held the door open for everyone coming behind her. Because that's what you do when you survive something that was meant to destroy you. You make sure others don't have to go through it alone. You make sure the path is a little clearer. You make sure the truth gets told. You make sure that even when the world is dark and cruel and unjust, there are still people willing to fight for what's right, still mothers willing to risk everything for their daughters, still chiefs willing to stand against corruption, still broken girls willing to find their voices again. Truth always finds its way home. Sometimes it takes longer than we want. Sometimes the journey is harder than we can bear. Sometimes we lose faith that it will come at all. But it comes. It always comes. And when it does, when truth finally stands in the light and speaks its name, all the lies scatter like roaches, all the false evidence turns to dust, all the injustice is revealed for what it really is, which is fear dressed up as power. Ava Johnson knows that now. She knows that she was never the problem. She knows that her excellence was never a crime. She knows that the only thing she ever did wrong was make small men feel smaller by being herself. And she knows that their smallness is not her responsibility. She knows that she has every right to take up space, to be brilliant, to win awards, to get the job, to live the life she dreamed of. She knows that her mother was right. She is a miracle. She is proof that God is still watching, still fighting, still lifting up the ones who were pushed down. This is the story of Ava Johnson, who was framed for winning, who was punished for being brilliant, who was crushed for daring to bloom. And this is the story of how she survived, how she fought back, how she reclaimed everything that was stolen from her. This is the story of injustice and redemption, of hate and hope, of lies and truth. This is the story of a mother's faith and a daughter's resilience and a system that finally worked the way it was supposed to. This is the story of a flower growing through concrete, reaching for sunlight, refusing to die. And that flower is still blooming. That flower is thriving. That flower is teaching other flowers how to break through their own concrete, how to find their own sunlight, how to remember that they were always meant to bloom, that no one has the right to stop them, that their beauty is not a crime. They tried to bury her. But they forgot that seeds always know how to become trees. They forgot that light always finds a way through darkness. They forgot that truth, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard the journey, always finds its way home. And when truth comes home, everything changes. Everything heals. Everything becomes possible again. This is that story. This is that truth. This is that light. Remember it. Believe it. Become it.